Before we start with today's video, I want to knock something out of the way straight away. This is not a fanboy video. This is not something that I want anyone in the comments to start going, oh, PS5 is great, Xbox isn't, Xbox is incredible, what's wrong with you PS5ers? None of this stuff, all right? This is not about console wars. Come on, it's 2021. We're bigger than that now. But this video is about addressing that concern that a lot of people keep saying about why is the PS5 upgrade for storage so complex? Why is it difficult? Why is it finicky? And this video is about telling you that it really isn't. Sony have not handled this perfectly. I've got to say, and I will highlight areas where I don't think they've done it very well, but for the most part, it is not a complex upgrade. It makes perfect sense. It is better for the industry overall, and I generally think the way PS5 have gone about this, on the whole, is the best way. And I know a number of you watching this are not going to be pleased to hear that. And if you are going to flame me in the comments, knock it out and go ahead. But don't just bang the dislike button just because you don't like my opinion. They are opinions. We've all got them. There is no need for us to conflict over that. Buy me a beer, I'll buy you a beer, and we'll chat about it another time. But for now, let's roll the start intro music and get into this video. Hello and welcome back, and today I want to address the constant comments we're seeing around on Twitter, on news articles that are trying to flame stuff, and generally just lots of people right now that are telling you that the PS5 storage upgrade is incredibly complex. And lots of people are telling you that upgrading the storage on your PS5 is way too complex. Why has Sony been so difficult about this? Why couldn't they have gone about it in the way that Xbox did, with a little plug-in on the external adapter? They're saying that it's needlessly complex, it's going to take too long, that it's dangerous, that a number of you that are going to be doing this are going to have so much difficulty doing it. And I'm here to tell you in this video a number of things. First and foremost, I am to tell you that it is not complex. I'm here to tell you that it is not going to take a great length of time to buy an SSD and to buy a heatsink that's on top, and that the installation of putting an SSD inside your PS5 is by no means difficult. It is something that I think even novice gameplay users are going to be able to do, and I think a number of people are being shocked into thinking that upgrading the storage on their PS5 isn't just difficult, that it's almost unadvisory, and that's really not the case. So in today's video, I am going to talk about just how easy it is to upgrade the SSD on your PS5. I'm going to be talking about why I believe that Sony have gone down this road in order to do it in this way. And I'm going to be talking about mainly about SSDs in the future. Why faster and more high enterprise SSDs are important, and why this storage upgrade has been conducted in this way. A number of people who have already upgraded their PS5s have already told you how easy it is, and as you can see, it's really not that difficult. So that is how to install the SSD. That is genuinely it. I've just done the whole thing. Yes, you have to go out and buy an SSD, and there are lots of different choices of SSD out there. At the same time, it is advisable that you go and get yourself a heatsink, and there's a lot of them out there, but there is genuinely thousands of them out there that do work in the PS5. So again, there's a lot of choice there, and of course I'm going to self-reverentially plug myself in the description. That was a horrible way to put it, wasn't it? In the description there are links to recommended heatsinks, recommended SSDs, and guides on how to do what I've just done. But let's talk about the first thing that people have a problem with about the PS5 storage upgrade. Why haven't they done it as easy as Xbox? A number of you must have noticed that the Series S and Series X, all they have to do is go to the rear of their device. There's a little slot. They get a tiny little SSD. They've got small 1 TB SSDs. You plug it in and boom, you've got additional storage. Why didn't PlayStation go down that incredibly user-friendly route? Well, the SSDs that are featured in the new series of Xbox devices utilize a protocol known as PCIe Gen 4 times 2. Now, Gen 4 allows 2,000 megabytes per second, and times that by 2 gives you 4,000 megabytes per second. However, that is the bandwidth. That is the potential connectivity possible with that little adapter. The actual SSD inside at 1 terabyte is actually noticeably less. Depending in terms of sequential read and sequential write, and sequential read being big files that we'll talk about later on, the external SSD that the Xbox uses is just capped. It's, again, you cannot exceed something like 3,500 8,000 on that external SSD. And although that is a lot of performance, when we look back at the previous generation that was using 500 megabytes SSDs, in terms of modern gaming, PCIe Gen 4 times 2 is a weird one, and no one really utilizes it. Now, again, another problem is the Seagate SSD module for the Xbox upgrade is only 1 terabyte. There isn't any other capacities, and for them to introduce other capacities, they'd have to actually make a bigger block, because to get that much NAND on that little device is very, very tough in the current climate of SSD. And also, you are limited to 1 TB from one manufacturer, which again has never really been the way Sony have done internal upgrades of their SSD. If you look at the PS3, the PS4, they've always allowed users, without breaking, it doesn't break the warranty, to install their own storage media. And in the case of the PS5, you can upgrade that slot with any number of SSDs. At the moment, there is around 20 different supported SSDs that meet the compatible minimums. And again, I do recommend 6 or 7 personally. Do check the link in the description. But those SSDs arrive in 250 gig for about 80 odd nicker. They arrive at 500 gig, 1 TB, 2 TB, and even 4 terabytes. That's the one that I've just installed inside that machine. These are massive SSDs for a huge amount of storage, but also they arrive in PCIe Gen 4 times 4, a potential 8,000 megabytes per second, and a lot of these SSDs providing sequential read of 7,000 megabytes per second. Remember, that's vastly higher than that of that Xbox adapter. Why is that important? Is that future-proofing, or is that needless OTT? Well, that brings me on to my next question. Why did Sony prioritize these SSDs? Why was it that Sony went, yep, we're going to go for these super fast SSDs right now as the chosen storage? Well, there's a few answers to that. First and foremost, the internal SSD storage speed of the PS5 is insane. It's like 9 gigabytes per second sequential read internally when you use compression. Now, because of that, if you put a storage upgrade inside, you need that storage upgrade to match that speed. Otherwise, it's going to present a bottleneck internally. So, as far as their games and their development and their console goes, they need to make sure that the storage inside can take giant data as quickly as possible. You've seen these, reduced loading times to mere single seconds. We have talked about a lot of these incredible immersive worlds that have been created on console platforms, Xbox and PlayStation and PC Gamer as well. But all of those environments, that data has to exist. And the bigger the world, the more data. And the bigger the data, and the more immersive the game, and the higher the frame rate, the more choices that a gamer can make, the more data that's required in nanoseconds. It's needed incredibly fast all the time. And that's why they made sure that the SSDs that this supports are the fastest possible. Right now, games development hasn't quite even managed to take advantage of the hardware resources, but it's not going to take long. Within the next year or so, we're going to start seeing the games that can take advantage of that tremendous bandwidth and that tremendous performance from these SSDs. Now, sequential SSDs performance, sequential read, or in other words, sequential, once again, large block data, like game cab files, like multimedia, that is what the system prioritizes. That's why they've gone for that minimum recommendation of 5,500 megabytes per second sequential read. They need to know that the SSD that you are getting meets those minimum requirements, so the game developers can make sure their games will run, be it on the internal storage or the external storage. On top of that, it's worth mentioning the evolution of gaming in the last year or so and in the future. We've got so used to this regimented idea that a console is about how well it handles graphics, and that's it. If we look at the previous generations and indeed the current generation, there was a big hoo-ha made about the CPU, the number of cores and threads and stuff like that. We talked about the amount of memory and the quality of the memory, the handling there. Think of the CPU as the brain, think of the hands as the memory. Then they've talked about the GPU, the graphics card, or the graphics capabilities of these systems. They talk about ray tracing and that. That is basically a component of the system that is dedicated to the handling of graphics. But in the modern generation of gaming, this new factor of computing, of gaming, of everything has reared its head. And it's how fast the system can pull accessible data. when we look, and even when you take a disc-based game and stick it in a PlayStation or an Xbox, the first thing it does is copy loads of data off the disc onto the core system because it needs the fastest access speed to that data. That's because as fast as the CPU is, as hefty and high in capacity as the memory is, and as beefy as the graphics card or GPU is, it's going to be useless if there's a bottleneck where how fast it can pull the data, because we need more and more and bigger data for these huge worlds that are being created in gaming. And therefore, these SSDs have to be insanely fast so they can push as much data. It's not just how fast the data is, but the quantity of data as quickly as possible. And that's why Sony have prioritized these SSDs and that performance for the long term of gaming. Which then leads us, let's face it, to the question a lot of people have been asking for the last 6 months. Why did it take Sony so long to start enabling that slot? Why wasn't it enabled at launch, even though it's physically there? Why is it only available now as a beta? This is something I've addressed in other videos, and I'm sorry to be repetitious, but if you haven't heard it, let me tell you. The reason that slot wasn't enabled when this system came out is because of the pandemic, because of semiconductor shortages, because of trade war, and ultimately because of availability being nil point. What happened was, when the PlayStation 5 was originally intended to launch in November, I believe, 2020, at that time, a whole pile of new SSDs for the market in PCIe Gen 4x4 was supposed to all arrive. There was meant to be the likes of the 980 Pro, there was meant to be the WD-SN850, the Firecuda 530, the Sabrent Rocket Plus, the Corsair MP600, the XLR8. There were loads of them. But because of changes in consumer trends, with semiconductor manufacturers having to chop and change what they're producing, because of water shortages in countries like Taiwan, which produce the bulk of semiconductors, and them having to lower the amount of production that they were doing, and the pandemic in the East starting much, much earlier than it did over here, resulting in changes in working practices and lots of people being unable to work, the result was that there was just delay after delay after delay of the release of these SSDs, which have only just started releasing in March and April of this year. Some of them releasing a little earlier, in like January as well, but even then arriving in incredibly small quantities. So when this system launched, the only SSDs that were out were the likes of the Firecuda 520, the likes of widely available PCIe Gen 3 SSDs, or even Gen 4, but too early Gen 4 SSDs. The result was that consumers, if that slot had been enabled, they would have rushed out to buy SSDs that were either not fast enough for the system to utilize, and again, a year or two down the line, you, the consumer, would suffer. But on top of that, those SSDs, even if they just eked across the finish line in terms of performance, would still be useless a year or two down the line. So Sony took the decision to disable that slot and allow the SSD market to become more heavily populated, to let the SSD market to become more available to end users. This is not hyperbole. This isn't me making it up off the top of my head. I hate seagulls. This is genuinely, when you look at the SSD market and you see how this has been released, this storage update wasn't something that wasn't there before. Extended storage, even when this system launched and I put an SSD inside this to show you guys what happened if you put an SSD on this system on day one, it showed you that it could see the SSD, it could see the storage, external storage, all of that stuff was enabled. They just made the mature decision to disable that slot. And I know not everyone's going to agree with me on this, and some people might say, why didn't they put more SSD space inside? It would have increased the price £200 or £300. Why didn't they just tell people that's why? Because a lot of people would have just kicked out about it. Or why don't they just let people buy SSDs? They'll have to buy another one later. That's a bit of a dick move, if you don't mind me saying. Which leads us later on into something I'm not happy about. When PlayStation announced this software beta, alongside it, they didn't release SSD compatibility lists, they didn't release heatsink compatibility lists, and that's something I think Sony dropped the ball on. They definitely should have told people a list, because they must have been bench testing SSDs. They must have known. And this beta arriving, if you go on Reddit and lots of different, PlayStation specific groups and stuff like that, People are compiling their own compatibility list, and again, I've got a whole one linked in the description and articles as well. But I can't tell you why Sony didn't just give people a list of compatible heatsinks and SSDs. They haven't really been forthcoming in the past. I will say on PS3 and PS4, they didn't exactly rush off the bat to tell people about SSDs. They recommend generally, because I guess SSD turnover is quite quick. But still, they should have made more of an effort to tell people, and that's something I am not happy with PlayStation 4. And the last thing I want to discuss is heatsinks, because heatsinks are a relatively new concept to console gamers. We're so used to, as console gamers, stick a disc in, give me my goddamn controller, I just want to play me some COD. I get it. And the idea of heatsinks does not sit well with that set up and forget mentality. Now, are heatsinks important? Should you buy a heatsink? You may have noticed a lot of SSDs like this are purchasable without a heatsink included. I've already installed it inside that. Now, I would argue to you to always buy a heatsink. A lot of people have not utilised NVMe SSDs as much as me, I'll be honest. I've done loads of years of this stuff. Now, these SSDs look like this. Now, to put that into perspective, the previous generation of consoles use this. Inside there is the equivalent of this. It's a tiny little board. It's a rectangular board rather than this long one. And it's covered in little NAND chips. And it's got heat sinks inside. It's also got a metal case to assist heat dissipation. But because these SSDs get very, very hot as electricity is passed through them, they require heat sinks to be attached. Heat sinks can retail for as little as $5 all the way up to $20 or $30 depending on the quality. These heat sinks, when they're on inside, draw the heat from the SSD and dissipate it into the air, allowing the drive to maintain a good temperature. Why is that important? Because a good temperature SSD performs better. It will last longer and it will maintain those high performance numbers for longer as well. So should you buy a heatsink? Absolutely. I've done a recommended list in the description, and please, whether you're going to use the software beta or you're going to wait until the full release, do not use an M2 SSD without a heatsink, because if you use it without a heatsink, day one it'll be absolutely fine. But these things do drop in performance quite notably, and that could make all the difference, particularly on online play or if you're a pro sports e-gamer. But this has been my video answering why is the SSD upgrade so complex, and my response saying no, it isn't. It makes sense in a number of ways, and I'm sure some of you watching this are going to disagree. That is what the comment section is for. But please remember, this is my opinion. You've got an opinion. We can just get on. If you enjoyed this video, click like. If you want to learn more, click subscribe. And of course, if you're still curious about the right SSD to buy, I've mentioned the links, but there's also the free advice section over on NAS Compared. It's manned by me and Eddie the Web Guy. Completely free advice service manned by two human beings, no robots. We will just answer your queries, let you know the right SSD or the right heatsink for your setup directly, and if things have changed, we'll let you know. It might take us a day or two to respond to you. We are just human beings, but do take advantage of that service.